Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gayle Carson. Welcome to Living Regret Free, a program that shows you how to live a better and more joyful life. As an added bonus, I invite you to listen to an introduction to my Mindset Matters program, which ties into this so well. Go to www.sobmindset.com. It's free, and I know you will enjoy it. If you'd like to contact me personally, drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com or go to my website, www.spunkyoldbroad.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter.
Hi, everyone. My guest today is Michael Sloopka. Michael is the founder of NegotiatingCoach.com and is an internationally recognized coach, teacher, and highly rated professional speaker. He's an expert on the topics of negotiating and decision-making dynamics that impact, influence, and affect negotiations in our personal lives, social lives, and especially our business lives. He's also the host of his new Negotiating for Success podcast. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
Great, Gayle. Thanks for having me on the program. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, as you said, everybody negotiates. We don't think we do, but we're negotiating all day long, every day. So, in your experience working with tens of thousands of people, why do some people fear, dislike, and resist negotiating? I mean, I guess it's the word itself that's kind of scary. I don't know.
Well, it's a good question. I think a couple of things. I think that you're right. People view negotiating as a bartering process that might involve friction, confrontation, degrees of difficulty, Gayle. And when people feel that it could result in some degree of confrontation, people generally avoid it. They're intimidated by it, and not many people have the skills, especially in their personal life and their social lives, to be able to manage a negotiation in an effective way.
Well, not only that, people react rather than proact. So if someone says something they don't like or they disagree with or whatever, they're ready to go at it right then and there, where negotiating might be a whole lot better. And I know you said that in some way it contributes to what this show is all about, living with regret.
Well, it's a great, the show is a great topic, and the title of the topic is excellent because I can count daily the number of times that people end up, regardless of gender or age, that they end up in a situation they regret because they chose not to attempt to mediate or negotiate a desired outcome. So we regret buying a particular type of car. We regret getting in an argument with a significant other or a spouse. We regret how we managed the situation with our children. So there's lots of real world examples that cause us to have regrets because we choose not to proactively deal with it in a way in order to avoid the regrets.
And I think it's too because people really don't know how to negotiate. I mean, they're really not taught. You can take a course, you can read a book, but there are some people who have just never done that. So, there's that fear of maybe the other person getting the upper hand or whatever if they don't come at them, with some kind of fierceness. But in your experience, are men, I'm really interested in your answer to this, are men better negotiators than women, and why?
I would say that men historically have perceived themselves to be better negotiators, Gayle, but they aren't. They've been at it a little bit longer. But I find that as of now, 2019, women can be much more effective negotiators. I think their nurturing nature historically has caused some problems for them. Men believe they're instinctively better as negotiators, but practically speaking, women can be fairly effective negotiators if they make the decision, Gayle, that they want to negotiate. But our historical patterns for females when they negotiate, and this is why, of course, in terms of compensation and the glass ceiling that's out there, where there continues to be problems with pay inequality and women earning less than men.
Well, you mentioned the word nurturing, and I definitely think there are women who have a softer side to their negotiation, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just whether they can hold their own if someone really is on the attack for them, like a shark.
Well,
But, yeah, what were you going to comment on?
well, I was just going to say, Gail, that I think that um, you can be a good negotiator, and a female shouldn't worry about that and creating the perception of being difficult. I think that's the first thing that goes through someone's head in life. In order to live regret-free, you have to realize in some situations you're going to get what you negotiate, not necessarily what you deserve. And I think I would encourage both genders, and especially women, not to feel as though that requesting what they want, it creates a perception of being difficult. And I think that's where they run into obstacles. And when they do that, they make concessions too quickly.
Well, it's true. I think, people come at you to intimidate you. And so if you are easily intimidated, it's one way of kind of throwing you off your game, so to speak. But what if they think that they're good at negotiating, but then they do have regrets about what comes out of it, and they say, well, maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that. And then they question their approach.
Yeah, and that's my number one tip to everybody, is to slow the process down a little bit, even if the negotiation appears to be immediate in a retail location or in a discussion with a significant other, which is to slow down and really think about establishing a consistent approach for how you do it. Women have a tendency to be a little bit more amiable as a personality type too than a male, and that generally can also cause some problems for them as well, because they had a desire to get along with others. But there's a particular formula and a methodology that people can apply, and once you understand and use that methodology in a consistent basis, your outcomes are much better, and you generally live a fuller life, because you don't spend your time regretting decisions that you've made or an approach that you took to a particular situation.
So are there particular negotiating tips that you give to people, or is there a particular methodology that is best to use?
Well, the answer is yes. The methodology is very simple but complicated in its own way. So the first tip that I would give everybody that's listeners of your program and your show is to ask great questions. I think the first thing that people make a mistake on is they tend to perceive what the other party wants in terms of an outcome, and that could be a significant other, it could be a landlord, it could be somebody you're trying to buy a house from. So the first tip is gather information and exchange information and try to understand the other side's perspective before you launch into discussions over what your particular needs are. So rule number one, gather and exchange information. Rule number two, understand what your goals are. What is your goal for a particular outcome? And number three is to ask for a little bit more than you expect to get, so that you can create the climate for the other person to create a win out of it. And number four, in terms of a very simple tip, is be prepared when something doesn't meet your needs, that you have the opportunity to walk away. But the core tip is gather information, exchange information, and try to be patient, even if that negotiation is occurring within a few minutes in a hotel, at a hotel. Try to take your time, be patient, and ask great questions.
Yeah, I think two real important points there are be willing to walk away, and sometimes that's hard to do when you want something so badly, but walking away is definitely a key. And the other thing is, yes, take your time. And I remember being in a negotiation. It was a real estate negotiation with my husband and son, with some other parties that were very well stocked with attorneys. And we had just one. And, it was going back and forth. And I'm sitting there and looking and thinking, oh, my gosh. And finally, I stood up straight up and I said, hold it. And everybody turned to look at me and they just stopped. And I said, I just want to make sure I said to my husband, I said, do we want to sell this building? And he said yes. And I said to the other people, do you want to buy this building? And they said yes. I said, okay, I just wanted to make sure. And then I sat down and everything went smoothly from there. So, yeah, I can appreciate everything that you're saying. So let me ask you, do good negotiating skills contribute to reducing or mitigating people's feel of inadequacy or insecurity, or does it contribute to it?
Oh, no, I think if you're a skilled negotiator, I think, and even somebody, I call it a degree of conscious competence, which means, people aren't all going to be professional negotiators. You could be a student, you could be a housewife, you could be a plumber, you could be a lawyer. The reality is that if you develop reasonable skills at it, it can contribute to less friction, less difficulty in your life, and you arriving at outcomes that are certainly much more pleasing to you as a person. I think people often accuse me, Gayle, they think that I am doing what I do for a living as a professional negotiator and a teacher of this subject. I think they feel that my first tactic or approach in a negotiation is to be generally aggressive or something to get everything that I want all the time. And I don't do that. I try to position all of my negotiations so that the other side can see a win from it. And that's where all of my energy goes. So I try to make sure the other side sees a good outcome. They appreciate a good outcome, and they got partially of what they wanted, because two people in a negotiation don't necessarily want the same thing.
And you, I know, believe in something that you think people get a little more resistant to change as they get older. Is that true? And how do you negate that?
Well, a couple of things. I think, as a person gets a little bit older, depending where they're at in their lives and a degree of regret, I know in my own personal family situation with parents, elderly parents, that one set of my parents sort of lives in a little bit of regret because they felt that they should have worked less and traveled more. And that seems to be a real strong thought in a particular person's mind in my life, that decisions that she made for 30 years in her working life, now she has limits because she's not able to travel as much, and that creates a bunch of problems. So I say this, that it doesn't make any sense to live in regret after it's over. I think everybody should attempt to understand, what do they want to achieve, what do they want to get out of life or a particular circumstances, and then they have to position themselves accordingly in order to be able to try to get that.
Well, it's true. What do they say? On your deathbed, you don't say, I wish I had worked more. You say, I wish I had spent more time with the family, or I had done this or that. So that's very true. And I think that all has to do with living regret-free, because there are certainly people that, as they age, are having a time of their life, and there are others that say, oh, poor little me. So I guess everything is the way you look at it, But what about personal relationships? I mean, do you find there is more of a struggle in, let's say, spouses or parent to child, or do you find it's a totally different kind of negotiation in business?
Well, I think there are parallels. So my advice to everybody is that the same methodology and the same strategies work, whether you're negotiating with a teenager, a child, a significant other, a spouse, a parent. People believe that you should negotiate a little bit differently in a business deal. And we teach a methodology where if there's high concern for the relationship, in other words, if I'm negotiating with a parent or a sibling, then obviously the relationship is important. When I understand that, I will be a little bit more compromising towards the win-win outcome than I would be if I'm negotiating with my bank for a mortgage rate, or with my mobile cell phone company on a contract extension or a hardware upgrade for an iPhone 10. So I tend to teach people that if there's concern for the relationship, you still need to negotiate to get at a desired outcome. I tell the story about when my adult children now, my adult sons were younger, we were negotiating for curfew times, and you're negotiating for pocket money and money to be generated for doing chores. I mean, life is all about negotiating every single day. And I think you have to try to create that scenario where I get this a lot in programs where parents say that I don't believe I should be negotiating with children. I'm not sure that's completely accurate. I think children start as naturally brilliant negotiators by asking for more than they ask for more than they expect to get. They ask for more allowance money, more expensive sneakers, and all kinds of other things, and they don't stop until they get a no.
And it's true. And even, I mean, I'm talking about little kids, the 2 and 3 year olds. They're great at negotiating.
Phenomenal. I just watched a FaceTime video of my nieces, and there's 3 of them between the ages of 1 and 4. And on the FaceTime, I could see the middle girl. She says no a lot to everything, including her parents. And she's the older brother is a little bit more amiable and doesn't do that. And you can just see that the nature of the middle one is going to be something where she's going to be very challenging, and she's going to have high expectations, and she's going to be a tough negotiator.
Yeah, it's amazing, just amazing. And then, of course, you get to school, and sometimes it's kind of eaten out of you, not physically, but emotionally, you know, because you've got to follow the rules. That's why they say people are so creative when they enter school, and they're not so creative when they finish it.
Well, it's true. That's one of the biggest struggles we have in corporate negotiations, Gayle, is teaching people to, we call it broadening the scope, which is to look for alternatives and new ideas, things that you can give to the other side that creates the win. I mean, every time I'm in a seminar, it's the most difficult thing we have is where I'm working with adults and I'm trying to teach them to think differently about a solution, and they're very stuck in a particular approach or an idea that they've got. And once you give people examples of how they can think differently, you can broaden the scope, and your outcomes are better.
So what is the biggest negotiation situation in business, and what's the biggest negotiation situation personally that you see a lot of?
Well, in business scale, it's very simple. In today's society in North America and globally, the number one challenge in all business negotiations is one party seems to have significant situational power over the other party, which makes it very difficult for one of the parties to negotiate. And a classic example of that is, let's say you were a manufacturer and you wanted to sell products to Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart or Target stores, and you were a manufacturer. The reality is those retailers hold significant power even over the largest manufacturers. And when they wield this significant power, it makes it very difficult to create a win-win situation when a customer has situational power. It can be the same as a hotel that's nearing being sold out. They can charge what they want for a room rate when their occupancy rate is high. When their occupancy rate is very low, the room rates mysteriously come down. So the first tip I give everybody is understand situational power. If everybody wants the same home on the same street, you're not likely going to get a price discount. If somebody wants the same Corvette in that particular color, then you're not going to get much of a discount. That's called situational power. And then on the personal side of negotiations, I think confrontation is a killer. People become argumentative far too quickly without understanding the motivation for the behavior. And confrontation leads to arguments, and arguments lead to people's desire to prove themselves right. And it's a huge problem.
It is a huge problem. I would think, that that's one of the things I look at with young people, and that's how quickly they separate after they get together. And the other thing that always amazes me are people who have lived together for, let's say, 10 years, and then they get married, and then they're separated or divorced in 2. And I always think, what is going on here? Because it just is amazing to me that all of this, that you're with somebody and then all of a sudden something happens. I mean, it's different if there's a big tragedy in the life and it really may affect somebody. But normally, if you know somebody well, I would think you would be able to talk it out. Now, in business, that is a very interesting thing, because in many situations, the weaker of the two, or the smaller of the two, in the last couple of years anyway, have merged and taken over larger companies. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to Target and Walmart and places like that, Home Depot, they are in the driver's seat, and it's really a phenomenal situation.
Well, I had a client of mine that was in the men's and women's grooming industry, namely shave-related products, which is a declining category that's irrelevant to this conversation, but it's a phenomenal product out of the UK in Europe, and they went to make calls on Walmart and Target and Walgreens and the major chains, and the answer was no. And if you get that answer 10 times across the drug channel in the United States, you're not going to get distribution. So the power that many of these retailers hold is very important, and people need to understand that. And it's the same true if you're trying to rent an apartment in Vancouver or Toronto or San Francisco or New York, that if the marketplace is such where there's more renters that are willing to pay more for an apartment, you better get used to the fact there's not going to be much of a negotiation.
Wow. So if I have done what I've done my entire life and I don't feel I've lived up to my potential, what are my options?
Well, I have a strong opinion on that, which is to start over. I don't mean start over as it relates to starting over. I mean start fresh. So if you believe that you have some regrets about how you've compartmentalized your life, or let's say you've been exploited by an employer or exploited in a relationship, and you feel as though you want to change that, then I certainly would sit down with oneself and figure out what are my goals and what are my objectives, which is goal setting for a negotiation, and how do I want to go about achieving that, and what decisions are I going to make. And I see a lot of people that are stuck, Gayle. I don't care whether they're 25 or 95, that they seem to be stuck with predicaments or decisions or compromises they've made in their life. And I say to people, if you didn't travel because you worked for 50 years, go to the passport office, get a passport, and if you're healthy enough, take a trip.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And if your husband can't go, don't take him.
Right. Yeah, I was fortunate. I happened to work all over the world, and I've spoken in 50 countries and 49 states. And my husband, I worked in Australia 5 times, and my husband came twice. I worked in Indonesia 5 times, and he came twice. And he was perfectly happy not to make the other trips. But let me ask you, let's talk about, because we're coming to the end of the show, how can people find you, Michael? Is there something you'd like to offer to our listeners? How can we help you there?
My email is michael@sloopka.com, MICHAEL @sloopka.com. My website is Negotiating Coach. That's negotiatingcoach.com. And for people that want to get better at this, Gayle, I believe that negotiation, it's a learned skill and it's an essential skill. So it's something you can learn. For your listeners, I would be more than prepared to offer a discount off our audio learning program, which is very simple. They can listen to it when they're walking, jogging, exercising in their vehicles, and they can learn some of these practical skills, practical phrases, and practical questions. So anybody that wants to purchase that online at our store, I'm happy to give them $19.95 off it. I think we set up a promotional code called Gayle1 or something if they enter that into the store. So if you go to negotiatingcoach.com, to go to the drop-down menu on shop, you'll be taken to our Shopify store, and if you enter the promo code Gayle1, they will get a $19.95 discount for being listeners of your program.
Fantastic. So again, it's Michael, MICHAAEL, Michael, and the last name is Sloopka, SLOOPKA.com.
Michael@sloopka.com.
Right. And the website is negotiatingcoach.com.
Correct.
Wow. A lot of things to think about. Well, we have about a minute and a half left, Michael. What have we not said that our listeners really should hear?
Well, I think, we've covered this whole concept of the idea of living regret-free. I think that the one thing I really want to emphasize that I just touched on when I gave people the website, which is negotiating is a learned skill, and it's an essential life skill. And I truly want to reemphasize the fact that people are not going to get what they deserve. They're going to get what they negotiate. And I have enough tragic experiences in my own life with some deceased spouses of mine. One of them, unfortunately, she had a lot of resentment, and it developed into an illness, and it was made worse by continued resentment. And I think it's really important that people understand that you can negotiate your way out of some difficulties, and that you have to want to invest the time to do it well in order to avoid the conflict and in order to avoid the resentment and the regrets that you might have from doing it. And I think learn a methodology. And the other tip I would have for people is that whether it's a big business negotiation or you're negotiating with a spouse or a significant other or a teenager, that the process is the same. I think too many people view negotiating, well, this is something that only business people and salespeople do on these high value deals. I think that everybody can develop a reasonable skill set at it. And my final advice would be that if you really are uncomfortable with it, Gayle, if a person just doesn't want to do it, then they need to hire an expert. They really should be hiring a real estate person to negotiate on their behalf. They should be hiring a lawyer to negotiate a business transaction on their behalf, or they should get a subject matter expert, because the mistakes can be costly. And if you make a costly mistake, that leads to major regrets. And you really can't live with that in the back of your mind for 20 years where you say, I wish we would have done this or sold this or gotten a higher price for something.
Oh, that's right on, Michael. And I know so many people who do that. Oh, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. And remember, if you're interested in learning more about what Michael has to offer, getting the discount off of his program, go to negotiatingcoach.com. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. I choose my guests carefully, so if you have someone you'd like me to interview, please drop me a line at gaylecarson13@gmail.com. In the meantime, check out my intro program, Mindset Matters, at www.sobmindset.com. See you next week.